If there is an extremely dramatic event, shade will protect the mob. However, it needs to be noted that shade is not the panacea. It too can cause health issues, but overall shade works. But if you looked at the number of cattle that have been fed since the maid combined against the number of cattle that have died in events, we need to put it into perspective. At Sandalwood we've used various shade design going way back to the shade program that we conducted in 92-93. We tried various shade quantities from 3.5 square metres a beast down to 1.5 square metres a beast. And we've now found that we're looking at shade of 2.5 square metres a beast for all cattle. And we've changed our shade design in recent times from having iron that is suspended between cables to going to a hail netting. And the reason for that is that since we've introduced shade to our feedlot, we've had more pen reconstruction work required. And the iron concentrates the runoff from the shade into a confined area of the pen, and that causes you to end up with holes in the pen floor. With the hail netting, we believe that we are still going to have adequate shade. We're getting about 70% shade effect, but the distribution of the water during the rain is across the whole area, and so that we don't have this ponding problem. And so it's important for anybody building shade to seek out through the industry to make sure that they end up with the best shade design.
We have considered shade, and we have a feeler where shade would fit in very well, but we believe that we don't need shade. The reasons are that firstly our summers can be very hot, but it's also very dry, and our feeler design means that we've got plenty of air movement over our yard. It's a fairly open property, and it's flat, so we get a fair bit of air movement. That's very important. The second thing is that we've used the RAP program, the risk analysis program put out by the MLA, which has identified that we have a very low heat stress risk. However, we have got shade in mind, but only for our hospital cattle. And that's looking at going ahead in next year. One of the issues that we have in the southern part of Australia is that we need plenty of sunlight in winter to dry our pens out. So shade that can be taken down is probably an important thing, and at this stage we're looking at a shade cloth type shade structure that can obviously can be taken down for approximately 6 months of the year.
Yeah, our shade structure is predominantly a steel structure. We've put 3 pier posts per 3,000 square metre pen, which supports a 15 metre span, I guess, of 7 pairs of cable wires, and then we've platted just normal 6 metre roofing line and clamped it between the 7 pairs of cables. So basically it's a suspension structure, but it's quite solid, and then we have support ends at each end of the cattle lane. So you know, some of the spans or some of the structures run up to about 360 to 420 metres in length, with each pen obviously having 60 metres by 6 metres of shade. Then what we've also done is, instead of making it a constant shade structure, we've then broken it up into having about 1.35 metre gaps between double sheets, which for 2 reasons allows a bit of sun in onto the pen floor after rainfall events, but because we've actually tilted the structure at 15 degrees as well to the pen surface, it's created the sort of situation where you can get some aerodynamic airflow even on a still day because of the gaps in the sheets of iron and the sort of the angle that the iron is suspended at. You get this sort of air movement and convectional air movement that actually circulates between the cattle, and And because you've got gaps in the iron, the cattle actually almost sort of stand like they're in a rugby line out there, and they're separate, so you get airflow between the cattle. So it works pretty well, yeah. Because it's not a solid structure and it's got daylight coming in between the sheets, after rain it actually dries out quite quickly, but also because of our pen surface structure being about 2.5 to 3% slope, the water drains away quite quickly. And because also we've got the iron at an angle, and with the gaps, the cattle tend to have to move to follow the shade, so they don't actually spend a lot of time in the one spot, and that's what actually creates pen wear and pitting and potholing, and so we tend to alleviate that a little bit.
We've got two separate types of shade. We've got the suspended tin, like a lot of feedlots have got, that runs north-south, and it works well given that the shadow moves across the pen, but we're also, we have a lot of pens, or rows of pens, that run east-west, and we've built shade cloth shade over those and spaced it out pretty well to try and utilise shade in those pens while not creating wet spots or the likes in the pens. At the end of the day, we've just got to clean pens more often at times through winter, but the design and the layout we've used, being south again, it all but chucks the shade outside of the pen through winter for the best part of the day, so it's not so bad. Our tin shade's 5 metres high, which is high enough to allow the air to circulate, and also high enough that the loader won't collect it when we're cleaning pens or the likes. Our shade cloth shade we've actually made 6 metres high to try and increase the airflow a little bit more from a drying perspective, given that the shade runs east-west. Our tin shade, there is just over 2 square metres per animal, and our shade cloth shade is about 2.5 square metres per animal. The tin shade certainly appears to stand up better in windy weather. I think there'll be less maintenance with it and the likes. The shade cloth shade hasn't been in for a long time, so I probably can't comment on it, but certainly the tin shade looks better and performs better, but it costs more. Certainly it does run a little bit of water off the back edge, and even through winter you get a dry spot in the pen under the shade, but so far it hasn't caused any great issues where pens have washed out or chewed out at the back of the shade.
Shade was installed at Aranui more than 12 years ago. The initial design was 2 rows of heavy shade cloth parallel to the ground and tensioned by springs to an outer cable. A later modification was that the springs were replaced by feeding the cable through the outer seam of the cloth, and the cables tensioned from each end and set at 15 degrees rather than parallel to the ground. The most recent design is the same as the previous, but with a cable through the centre as a stabilising function. At Aranui, animals under shade are managed under the following regime. All Wagyus or Wagyu F1s are under shade after 80 days, and the 70-day supermarket cattle for at least half their time in the feedlot.